What sociological discovery has been the most helpful to your practice? Do I have to say something pleasant? Because I don't think I can. Okay, but here's the thing. Okay, really, it's not that people dislike each other. It's that they simply like their own kind better. Okay, like for example, so I'm Cuban. I'm really integrated to the Anglo world. Okay, so is my sister, so is everybody in my family. When you have a party, when my sister has, the only sociable person in my family is my sister, okay? So she has a party, and you can't tell her from an American, but 90% of the people there are Latin, okay? She doesn't have an accent in English. 90% are Latin, and then when you get to know them, 90% of that 90% are Cuban, okay? And 90% of them are from Santiago, one city in Cuba, and the Havana people are in another corner. And you say, how is this possible that this self-segregation is happening at every level so that the people from one city are with each other? And the reason is that they like each other. They just like each other. We're from that end of Havana, of Cuba, that has the French influence, and it has the black influence, and those people up there have this Catalan influence, and we don't like them. Or let's just say, no, it's not that we don't like them, we just like our own side. So I'm always aware that people will group around people that are like themselves, and I never like to cut across that. I don't think, when people say, you gotta have diversity, I said, yeah, we've gotta have diversity in the city, but there's gonna be one bar that's gonna be the gay bar, okay? That's the way it goes. And that bar over there is gonna be whatever. That's where the young people are, and they're more comfortable with each other, and we're not going to, I don't have the power to integrate in a finer grain than that. In fact, I can't even really design a public space that isn't in some measure for males or females. Because I know how males behave. They sit a certain way. They don't relate to each other eye to eye. The women do. So you set up different ways to sit. And it's almost like, I don't know why it's become politically incorrect to even talk about the differences between how males and females use public space differently. But it's kind of like everybody has to be so diverse and so similar. But there is a sociology that I think is, I think the great sociological discovery is that people are different, and that you've got to group them in close proximity so that, for example, a Democrat lives next to a Republican, but don't try to put them in the same house, if you know what I mean. Like, it's, yeah, you gotta know, like I'm a Democrat, but and I have a Republican neighbor who just loves trucks and guns, and I really like him. I heard that from Sandy Sorlin the other day. I really like my Republican neighbor. I said, that's great, that's nice, but you wouldn't marry one, would you? You know, that's what I mean. There's a level at which we don't have the power, and we shouldn't want to integrate people. We just shouldn't. So the great sociological discovery is that diversity exists, and you shouldn't blend people too closely because they'll get unhappy. In fact, don't worry about it, it won't even happen. It just won't happen. I have seen some very open-minded people have a very bad attitude. They're populist as can be, they love everybody, but when they go to a restaurant that kind of poorer people live in, you know, the greasy pizza restaurant, they say, oh my God, let's not go in there, that's horrible. Yeah, well, you really don't like those people, do you? Not completely. They eat different food from you. And I notice that all the time. So one way that I do it is that, for example, when there's a town center, let's say it's large enough to have 3 restaurants, I make certain that there are 3 kinds of restaurants, you know? And I made certain that one of them serves grilled cheese sandwiches and greasy hamburgers. You know, because there's some people that like that, and then the next one is going to be healthier food, and that's the way it goes. And if you put them all in one restaurant, you get nothing. You just get this weird blend that doesn't work. So it's very real that people are different, and you have to understand that right away. And that is diversity, is that people are different. That used to be a very popular thing. Now it's less popular all the time because you want everybody to be exactly the same, and it doesn't work that way. Okay. Okay, this is a question which is typically asked of the right by the Tea Party. Why do you want to take our cars and houses away and make us live in cramped apartments in crime-infested cities? Why do I want to? Well, I don't want to make you live like that, but there are apparently some people that do want to live this way. And they have a right to, density and not having a car, and they like gritty places that to you might seem crime-infested, okay? And they too have a right to that. And so what we want is we want to level the playing field so that you can have your nice house and the perfectly clipped lawn, and they can have the gritty sidewalk that you might consider crime-infested. They would consider you incredibly boring, And all we ever propose is to level the playing field so that both places can be built. And by the way, if you try to blend them, that guaranteed that doesn't work, because all you do is get high density that's really boring. There's an awful lot of housing now that's high density, put on a beautiful green field with a pond, that has the disadvantage of not having a yard and the disadvantage of not even having a street life. Nothing works, nothing's any good, it's too pretty. Because one of the things that happens when you give up your yard by having density, you really want a hell of a street life. You want a lot of things going on in that street. The blending gives you neither. And, somebody said, anyway, it's just clear. You can't have a townhouse without a town. You've got to have a town. And then if you want a single-family house, make it a single-family house. Have a proper yard. Don't make a little stamped yard. Give them a real yard that can have a pool. And I think everything has its own reason. The problem is that each side is trying to exterminate the other. The people who live in cities don't want you to build sprawl, and the people who live in sprawl, they don't want you to build cities. So everybody's trying to exterminate the other. And actually on a moral basis. Oh, it's immoral to live that way so densely, or it's immoral to waste so much land. And I think that's what I find unbearable, is that the ethics, suddenly there's an ethics overlay to just simple human preference. I prefer this, I prefer that, and people are saying, well, you're terrible for preferring that. And that I find very, very hard to take. The virtuous people. I'm kind of down on virtue these days, just generally, because it's just people preventing other people from being being the way they want to be. Given the climate and social challenges in the horizon for residents of Florida, where in this state would you recommend someone retire? Well, I would recommend that you retire. I would recommend that you retire here, and I think one of the reasons is that taxes are less. I think that winter is very hard on your bones, so I understand why you would want to be warm. And I think that the water, the beach is very soothing. The ocean is very soothing. There's nothing that feels better than a sunny beach walk. So I like Florida a lot. It's got a lot of beaches. Now, if you think that you're going to be flooded if you live near the coast, well, that's true, but you can deal with that pretty easily by raising your building up a little bit and so forth. So I'm not that afraid of climate change, so long as a sea level rise, so long as your building deals with it. And I think it's worth the risk. I think living near the beach is really worth the risk. So I do like Florida. Where else would I recommend that you retire? That really is personal preference, but I'll tell you, as a male, okay, as a guy, I see these men in a place like one of the new towns of Florida, and you see men who actually probably ran corporations, who had a nice life, who accumulated wealth, and they're sitting outside of Dunkin' Donuts with short pants and running shoes looking like total losers, because that is the only place that they can gather. The social space is Dunkin' Donuts at 10. And the lack of dignity is astounding. They're really, for me, they're all losers, even though they may have run, a great trucking company somewhere. Now you go to France, and you see an old guy sitting there with a nice suit that they've had for 30 years, but it's a nice suit, and a cane like this, sitting in a cafe, looking at the girls going by, and I say, looking at the young women going by, and I say, now that's dignified, That's what I want to do when I get old. So I would say that you have to actually just picture yourself in detail. Like if you're a male or you're a female and you're old, imagine how you're going to spend your time. Do you want to be outside of Dunkin' Donuts or in some kind of playing gin rummy in some lobby? Or do you want to be sitting in a cafe watching the world go by and just raising your hand like this and having the next glass of wine brought in and then raising the other hand and having your lunch brought in? Give me a break. So just imagine yourself, and all that choice is available. You can choose where you want to retire. So yes, I would recommend that you actually experience different ways that you can be, and choose very well. I was with somebody this morning who said social isolation is the biggest problem. You don't have to be among friends all the time, but you do have to be among people. Humans are very interesting to look at, and if you can find a seat with a cafe table that for very small cost, you order a cafe every once in a while, you order a glass of wine every once in a while, you order a Perrier, for very small burn rate, let us say $10 a day max, and you can sit there in a cafe table watching the world go by in a beautiful boulevard, that is a good deal. Now, you can spend $300 a day having a beautiful double-height living room in some McMansion and be absolutely bored to death. And I'm afraid that most Americans are just offered that second choice, the McMansion, or they're offered, you can go to the golf club bar. That's not, that's not for me. It's definitely for other people, but not for me. I think that the choice of sitting in a cafe with a cane, that photograph that I have in my mind, that photograph should be put up there at the sales office and say, would you like this? And I think some people should have that choice. I have such a clear vision of what I want to be like when I'm 80, like absolutely clear. I know exactly the color of my suit, the height of my cane. I know the wine I'm going to drink, and I know the hat, and I know that Andrew there is going to think I am really cool. I just know it. I have a perfect vision of it. I also have a perfect vision of those poor guys in Dunkin' Donuts. God, it's absolutely awful. Okay, assuming we can return to a full pre-pandemic life, what is the one lesson or lifestyle change we've learned in the past year that we're likely to hold on to? Number one lesson is that it's if you have a nice setup, working at home is great. Okay, working at home and not commuting is great. You also have the lesson that it can get very lonely, And so those lessons are, how can I work at home and yet have enough going that at least 2 or 3 times a day I can be among people, The other lesson, and I've spoken about this earlier, is that it's delightful to be outdoors, and that actually buildings should have serious outdoor places where we learn of that, because sunlight and air are so good for your health. This is, they tell us, be outside, get sunlight, get vitamin D. Well, now, for example, Liz and I have experienced breakfast outdoors. And it's, we had a nice little thing going in the kitchen, but breakfast outdoors is wonderful. Wonderful. We had that this morning, and it was wonderful. It takes 2 hours, and You feel wonderful. Well, I'm sorry, we've lived in the house for 43 years and we never did that before. The pandemic reminded us that the outdoors is a wonderful place and you have to design for it. That's the second thing. The third thing that is kind of counterintuitive, most conversions to workplace damage the house. You ruin your living room with your papers, or you ruin your dining room with your papers. You have papers all over the place. It's a mess. But there are a couple of people down the street that actually converted their garages to workplace. And they open out. They have glass front doors, and they open out to the front. And what I realize is that the garage is actually a loft. It's a loft like this one. If you design your garage not only for cars, but to be converted to a workplace, suddenly your house is a live-work unit. And I've been thinking a lot, what does it take to make a garage a loft? First of all, 12 feet is too narrow. 12 feet is too narrow. It's fine for a car, but not for a workplace. And I'd say, well, make the garage 16 feet wide. Okay, that's perfect. You can have a really nice office at 16 feet. Second thing is, instead of having a two-car garage, have two separate garages. Because one you need for storage. So if you have a single two-car garage and you're working there, you're going to have a lot of kayaks and exercise machines next door. So take the garage seriously, make it taller, make it wider, and make two of them. And then you can always convert one. And so I have always thought that garages were the most dysfunctional part of the house, that you have to put it in the back in the alley, get rid of them. The garages are antisocial. And now I've come to believe that the garages are potentially the most social part of the house. So that's one of the things I've learned. And it's kind of exciting how that transforms the house. So those are three lessons of the pandemic that, frankly, I'm grateful for. Is there an optimal population size for a municipality? Say a town or city with a full array of services, but not too big, with robust participation, like what's the size? Okay, so we happen to be discussing that this week, this month, today. Like, what is the size? There's a lot of talk about the 15-minute city. The 15-minute city depends on, what do you mean by 15 minutes? Is it 15 minutes of walk? Is it 15 minutes of bicycling? Is it 15 minutes of electric bicycling? Okay? And it's pretty easy to say, if you walk 15 minutes, it is 3/4 of a mile. If you bicycle, it's 2.5 miles. Okay? So let us assume that it's walking. Now, if you have a 1.5 mile city and you do a radius, and then you put a density on it that says, let's say 8 units to the acre. 8 units to the acre will give you houses, townhouses, and apartments, which is real diversity, plus parks and schools and churches and all this stuff, and roads. So 8 units to the acre doesn't mean 8 units to the acre. It's denser than that, but it includes everything. And then you multiply the area times 8 units to the acre times 2.6 people, and then you get a number. And the number is something like 18,000 people. 18,000. Now you can say, well, that's too much. Well, you might be a little lower, a little high, but it's around 18,000 people if you want to have a 15-minute walkable city. Well, what does that mean in terms of retail? Well, it depends on the demographics of your place, also who's running the show. Like, I think a normal family can make a great living running a small market, and 3 people can run bars, and other people can run restaurants, so long as they are specifically designed for those 18,000 people. Don't imagine you're in Manhattan and you're bringing in, sushi when you're really in Mississippi and they don't want sushi. They want catfish. Okay, so you got to get it right. But if you get it right, a lot of people can actually provide, quite a few people can provide the sociability for 18,000. 18,000 is not small. 18,000 is bigger than, I think, most colleges are not 18,000, and yet they support a college town, And so you start, always start with the shed, the pedestrian shed. Like, what can we walk to? Now, if you wanted to have a bicycle shed, it's much bigger. And then what you get, a 5-minute bicycle shed is 24,000 people. 5-minute bicycling is a circle of 24,000 people. Wow. You know? And if you put 15 minutes bicycling, I think it's something like 86,000 people. You know, it's astonishing. It's the size of Coral Gables, actually, 86,000 people. And you know, Coral Gables has big main streets, it's got schools, it's got universities. So the first act is to decide, do you want to design a city for bicycling or walking? And by the way, the electric bike is if you have an electric bike at 20 miles an hour, you're in the hundreds of thousands of residents within the shed. So you have to decide, first of all, how you want to calculate the walking distance or the bicycling distance, and then put in a pretty normative 8 units to the acre, and then find out at 2.6 how many schools they need, how many bars and restaurants they can sustain, how big the grocery store can be. I think the grocery store, you know, a small grocery store needs 5,000 people, you know, if it's the right grocery store. And so, yes, you can make a society pretty easily, and you can determine the size. That is one thing that is pretty scientific, actually. The only thing that isn't so scientific is the wealth of that 18,000 people, and how much money they have to spend. They do have to eat the same amount. It's just the, you know, the quality of the food has to be cheaper, more expensive. Sorry to be politically incorrect, but you know, people have different incomes. And yeah, this is a pretty, I can give a pretty scientific answer to this number. Now, here's a paradox. If your place is close to a big city, if this place you're designing at 18,000, if it's close to a big city, and you have really good transportation, forget about it. Everybody will get in the transportation, and just go to the big city for their nightlife. So one of the paradoxes is that these cities that you're implying can be complete, they really have to be some distance from the attractor, you know, from something that's very attractive. I have seen cities in Europe that are beautifully designed with beautiful transit systems, and everybody every night is in Amsterdam. You know, you have a city of 50,000 and everybody goes to Amsterdam. Well, why wouldn't you? You know, your rapid transit gets you there in 15 minutes. And you've got Amsterdam. And so that city should have been more distant from Amsterdam. That would work better. So there are all these variables that exist. I think a slower transportation system, intercity transportation system, gives rise to a better city, because you can't just be bopping around to the next one. You have to do it yourself. You have to stay in one.